Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back, everyone. Next, we usually go around the room and say our names, and then I'll introduce our speaker. I'm George.
Grisha. Greg. Robert. Matthew. Richard. My name is Sherry. I'm Tony. Jack. I'm Richard. Ian. I'm Brad.
Welcome, everyone. Our speaker is Ian Challis, and Ian Challis is a student and teacher in the Insight tradition of Buddhism. He is a teacher, founding member, and past guiding teacher of Insight Community of the Desert in Palm Springs. Aya Kema, Lee Rassington, Naranya Liebenson, Larry Yang, and Irina Reisman are key teachers who have inspired and illuminated his practice. Serving queer community is a passion. This year will mark his co-teaching of the 7th annual queer retreat at Dhamma Denya Retreat Center with Leslie Booker. Ian teaches regular drop-in classes as well as retreats. He's a qualified teacher of MBSR, a graduate of Spirit Rocks Community Dharma Leader Teacher Training, and was formally invited by Irina Weissman to teach in the lineage of Yu Ba Kin and Ruth Dennison. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, George. And thank you, Chris, for all your support coming into this. And thanks to the organizers of this beautiful group. It's so impressive to see a thriving hybrid Sangha, because I know how difficult that can be. We've gone through a lot trying to create that in Palm Springs in the wake of the pandemic. And it's really just inspiring to see people online and people in person, and that beautiful intention to practice together as Sangha realized. So also I wanted to welcome Maria, who identified as somebody here for the first time. So welcome, Maria. Glad you're here. This is my second time with the group, and really glad to be here with you all. And so in October, I taught that queer retreat at Dhamma Dena, which is a retreat center in Joshua Tree that was founded by Ruth Dennison in the late 70s. It's a very interesting, funky, wild, and beautiful, inspiring place to practice. And so I was teaching it with Irina and Leslie Booker. And when we were working up the description of the retreat, the phrase, "How can we hold our grief, our shame, and our joys in these challenging times," was offered. That was one of the phrases we were going to use in the description. And I noticed the immediate aversion I had to the word shame. And I was like, who wants to talk about shame? Who wants to even think about shame? And that was interesting for me to have recognized that reaction. And I realized shame is something I'm really aware of. And at the same time, avoiding it is a guiding principle of my life. One of the ways that I organize what I do and what I don't do. So there's a documentary series about a queer Argentinian fashion designer named Santiago Artemis, and it's called No Time for Shame. And it's great. It's a great little show to watch when you're having dinner, and his energy is fantastic. But tonight this morning, I wanted to create some time for shame, a little space for shame, to bring it out of the shadows a little bit. So there's that word, shame. I just wonder, what might be coming up for you just hearing that word or knowing that the talk tonight is going to be on, why do I keep saying tonight? That the talk today is going to be about that. Is there a physical reaction at all to hearing that word? Is there aversion coming up? Shame, red with shame, hot with shame, dying from shame, flooded with shame. Pretty powerful word. And for me, it's really one of the more intense and difficult emotions. And I think I probably deal with it more than I deal with anger, for example. And this is a big part of the Dharma. How do we hold these really powerful feelings that are a natural part of the human experience? How do we make space for what's difficult? How does our practice, how does the Buddha's teaching resource us or give us tools so that we can be more at peace with what hurts? So we know the Buddha said many times, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. And shame, regret, hatred, grief, loss, these are places where a lot of human suffering is located. These are the places that it can be so difficult to inhabit, to relate to, or sometimes even just to acknowledge or hear, because for me at least, I usually want to be anywhere else than with them, those things. And at the same time, that's not possible because these emotions are a natural part of being human, being embodied. So while these emotions are going to be things that I'm sure I'm going to experience all through life, it's possible that we may learn how to be less afraid of them. We may suffer less in their presence as we begin to know them as they are and hold our experience with more kindness, more patience, more compassion. So it's kind of like living in the desert here in Palm Springs where I live. There are diamondback rattlesnakes and there are scorpions and there are tarantulas. And a couple of weeks ago, I was introduced to desert centipedes because one was lodged in my hoodie sleeve. And that was like a 7-inch creepy crawly that was quite surprising. But as long as I live here, and especially if I venture out on the trails, I'm going to see these beings from time to time. They go with the land. It's their land. And I could, shut down in fear of them, or I could go back to Washington State where I lived for many years and there are no poisonous snakes west of the Cascades. I could figure out ways of avoiding their natural presence, or I could choose to understand them better, know their habits, know their locations, increase my understanding and respect for them, so that when I encounter one, I can behave in a way that is appropriate and less likely to lead to harm for me or for them. And that's a lot more skillful than if I rely only on my autonomic response when I see a snake or a scorpion or whatever it is. And the experience of shame has that pre-verbal component for me, for sure. There's that rush of shame, being flooded with shame, wanting to fall through the floor. So it feels, to me at least, not unlike those first moments of encountering a snake along the path. Physical, visceral. And it takes some time for me to even know, oh, this is shame. Because my response is usually to run from the discomfort, run from the situation that has triggered it as quickly as I possibly can. So this is a raw emotion. And research shows what we know. In a moment of shame, logical thinking, goes offline. And there's that physiological urge for self-protection. So a researcher on shame, Dr. Gerald Fishkin, writes this: shame isn't associated with cognition at all. At the precise moment shame is triggered, we are emotionally hijacked and there's no prefrontal activity. We automatically want to be anonymous and invisible. Emotionally hijacked. And that really rings true for me when I think of the experience of shame, the dukkha of shame. So it's interesting to look a little at the physical experience, and then we'll look at the cause. And shame is a tricky one, because that wish to get away, to become anonymous, invisible, that accompanies shame, doesn't invite us to look very deeply, to examine it. So I tend to want to put as much distance between me and that moment of shame. I don't want to look at it. I want to run away from it. And as soon as there's a little bit of distance, I want to pretend that I never felt it. And in fact, the feeling is so unpleasant that I will do almost anything not to feel it. So shame comes in a lot of different flavors. I'll name some of them later, but at the core, in the Buddha's way of identifying the three root poisons or defilements of greed, aversion, and delusion, it's very much aversion, self-aversion, a sense of being unworthy, of being found deficient, not worthwhile, unlovable, of not belonging. And most of us don't need that disapproval to come from the outside, from others. We judge ourselves. We imagine what others must be thinking or seeing, especially as queer folk or marginalized people in a homophobic, transphobic, binary, racist culture. We experience, and unless we're always alert and ready for it, we experience dominant culture's judgment, or the ghosts of judgment that we've internalized, our parents, teachers, bullies, even our peers sometimes. And underneath the sense of unworthiness is the sense that we're broken, not right, not deserving of love, not deserving of connection. So what a difficult emotion, how painful. And it's a hindrance not only to our happiness, but also a hindrance to our practice. And when I started meditating on a regular basis at home, I noticed again and again waves of shame and regret, but a lot of shame seeping into my experience. And the discomfort was enough to literally propel me off the cushion. I'd remember something I did or didn't do or said wrong or was harmful in some way, and boom, I would levitate practically off the cushion and leave the room. Definitely no time for shame for me. No way, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to be with this at all. And I think that was probably a clue that I really needed to look at this, really needed to actually bring some kind attention to this, although that's been a many-year process. And this is actually one of the ways the hindrance of aversion shows up in our practice, through that hijacking sense of shame. I'm not okay, I'm not capable, I'm intrinsically flawed, or I'm an imposter, I will be found out. And you can't imagine how common that last one is for people who offer Dharma talks. That lurking fear that all of my negative self-assessments are actually true, and that you see it so clearly. So sitting here, even 500 miles away, is an incredibly vulnerable place to be. It's definitely an edge. And that fear of shame and humiliation is an incredible motivator. It works. I will go to incredible lengths to avoid feeling shame. It works. But at what cost? Is this how I want to live? Is this how any of us want to live? Making choices and acting motivated by the fear of judgment, motivated by the fear of feeling the pain of shame, because it is painful. It feels like the exact opposite of where creativity lives for me. So what is this energy? So it's both powerful and a little slippery, because shame likes to hide. And it's so unpleasant that when the shame has passed away, an activated shame state has passed away, We really don't want to go back there. So I know I'd rather do anything than recall moments when I felt exposed or humiliated or laughed at. And yet the conditioning is still there, activated or not, examined or not, ready to pop up. So hopefully, when we look and we put this into words, it can be easier to see, to get a grasp of. Of course, it's not solid because no emotion is solid. But we may be able to understand it better the more we talk about it, which is a lot to ask. So the research says that it's actually a relatively late and uniquely human emotion. And when I read that, I was like, no. I am sure dogs feel shame. I know they do. And so then I looked into that, and apparently animal behaviorists don't believe that dogs really feel shame. They actually believe that dogs make a face and act in ways that make us feel sorry for them because we think that they're experiencing shame. And so we feel sorry for them. I don't know. But it is a very human emotion, that I do know. And it's mostly about the fear of being disconnected from others because of behaviors that fall outside of group norms. So as social animals, being cast out or rejected from the group is an incredibly vulnerable and dangerous place to be. So it's a kind of self-awareness of how we're fitting in, how we're seen. And the pain of shame is a negative motivator that to keep us from doing something that might cause us to be cast out or targeted. It helps us get a sense. If I do X, how will I be viewed by the group? What's likely to keep me safe and what might get me thrown out of the group? And what I think the really, really interesting thing is about this is that research shows that it isn't related to our own sense of right and wrong, to our conscience, to our ethics, to what we really believe, but that we feel shame about transgressing group norms, whether we share those norms or not, whether we really believe in them or not. So this makes so much sense as queer people or marginalized people, like the internalized shame that we carry, that we have because we've absorbed these norms. And yet in our hearts, we know there's nothing wrong with how we are, who we are, what we are, how we identify. So much of what we feel around shame then is received. We're conditioned to feel shame depending on our culture and our caregivers. And then we internalize that voice so that we are inflicting pain on ourselves even when there's no one watching because of that drive to keep safe. And we all know those voices. So there's a big difference between shame and guilt. And guilt is more, oh wow, so sorry I did that. I can see that that caused harm. I'd rather not do that in the future. Is there a way to repair this? And shame is more like, I'm a bad person, I am defective or deficient, and I'm not ever going to be this way. And there's a difference there, because shame is isolating and separating us from others. We want to hide, we want to disappear. Whereas guilt often leads us to make amends, to connect with people, to heal, to repair. So I want to talk a bit about how we practice this, and at the same time I really want to name shame, because for something that is common to the human experience, I don't think we talk about it very much. We maybe know how it feels, that heat, the paralyzingness, the bitterness of it, but it comes in so many flavors, unwanted exposure. And there are so many ways that we are shamed by others or receive and internalize messages of shame in this world. One of the very first ones I think I was aware of in my own life, very early recollection, was being shamed for sensitivity. you're too sensitive, or you're too sensitive for a boy, maybe, I don't know. But basically it's like saying your heart is too open. You care too much. You're too sensitive. And then there are all the varieties of shame that come after. There's body shame and gender shame and sexuality shame and kink shame and race shame and financial shame and achievement shame and ability shame. Shame around chronic illness, shame around neurodivergence, queer shame, shame around aging, shame about what we feel, shame about how we express ourselves, what we're interested in. That sort of diffuse, you're just not right shame. And all the subtle forms of shame, even shame about how we communicate, for talking too much or not talking enough. Our very human needs can be shamed. All the shames that we feel, and I'm sure you can add to this list. And when you get down to it, it's that shame of being human, which is just preposterous. What a crazy thing that we buy into the shame of being human. So, literally colonized by the energies that seek to control us and make us conform. And shame is a tremendously effective means of doing this, because we become colonized, internalized the voices of shame and effectively continue their work of isolating, dividing, undermining our confidence. It's really like a virus. We get infected with this. And then, like an antidote, I hear Irina Weissman's words, if it's not kind, it's not true. If there's not kindness in the field, we're not really seeing clearly. And there's nothing true in this kind of shaming, nothing that really benefits, nothing that comes from that intuitive and aware mind that we strengthen in our practice. So rather than encouraging our intentions of connection, of care and growth, shame actually isolates, paralyzes, and says no to the beauty in us. So in a moment of shame, when shame gets triggered, without mindful awareness of mind states, that third foundation of mindfulness in the Satipatthana Sutta, knowing your mood, your mental state, without that mindfulness which we develop on the path and the practice, we're not able to see the other except through the projection of what they must be thinking, what our patterns of shame are believing in that moment. So rather than being able to connect and focus on both of our needs and experience in that moment, all I can see is my own. So then I'm unlikely to work skillfully with a situation when I'm gripped with shame. I'm not even going to see it. This is the suffering that arises from aversion, the pain of feeling that internal disapproval, that internal abandonment, the complete opposite of unconditional love. So I want to make an aside here and then come back to how we can practice with this, because those of you who've been practicing for a while and reading and going to retreats and Dharma talks and maybe programs and teachings, you may have come across the words hiri and ottappa, which the Buddha called the guardians of the world. And these words, hiri and ottappa, are translated usually and archaically and persistently as shame and moral dread. And I wanted to bring this up because I think in the Buddha's teachings, that's really the only place you come across shame is in this teaching on hiri and ottappa, shame and moral dread. So I find that translation really, really unhelpful, because what this teaching is really about is not about shame, but healthy remorse, a sense of conscience, ethical integrity, our wise intentions, our sila, our wise speech, action, and livelihood. And these are connective, not isolating like shame. So when the Buddha called these out as the guardians of the world, It was in the sense of enabling us to understand and remember what's wholesome, what's right, what's unwholesome, what's unskillful, and the impact that our actions have on ourselves and others. So Ajahn Sujato, an Australian monk and scholar, calls hiri the inner quality that protects one from doing things that are unwholesome or harmful. So it's our conscience, our ethical integrity. And otapa has the sense of understanding the effects that harmful actions will have. So it's awareness of the downstream of the actions that we take in the moment. So it's really another talk, but I wanted to touch on it because that archaic translation is still widely used. And just to underscore that shame, as we use the word today, has no place in the Buddha's teaching because it's self-aversion and delusion. So what we're really talking about is that sense of caring and connectivity and justice that moves us toward the greater good. And self-interest, small self-interest, but what is truly, not small self-interest, but what is truly in our self-interest, the inner voice of our Buddha nature, what connects us to people. And that couldn't be further from that painful, hot sense of shame. And this has a direct bearing on how I respond when I cause harm, or when I can tell harm has been caused, because someone says, ouch, and if I'm caught in shame, this incredibly uncomfortable feeling, I'm concerned with my pain and wanting to get rid of this as soon as possible, which blinds me to their experience. And without that sort of judgmental shame or an awareness of it, I can focus on what the situation is really asking me, or become aware. There's shame here. Can I know that and still respond from a place of caring? So in the Buddha's teaching, none of us are intrinsically wrong. None of us are damned. None of us deserve to feel this difficult emotion that we call shame. It's just part of inhabiting this human body and having this human brain. And at this point in a talk on shame, pretty much every Dharma teacher will bring up Angulimala, who murdered 999 people. This is an ancient story from the suttas, the record of the Buddha's teachings. So it's said that he was about to murder the Buddha after having murdered 999 other people, and he didn't, because the Buddha talked him out of it and got him interested in something other than killing. And of course, he became enlightened. So, even somebody who killed 999 people and wore a string of fingers around their neck and was about to kill the Buddha was not outside of the Buddha's teaching and the Buddha's care and the possibility of healing and wholeness. So Ayya Khema says the formula is this: recognize, no blame, change. No time for shame in that. Recognize, no blame, change. In other words, see what is happening, let go of shaming and blaming, focus on the appropriate response in this moment from this place of connection. And of course, make the amends necessary, when we've harmed another being. Okay, so how do we hold shame, toxic shame, in the context of the Dharma? How do we do that? So of course you can work with a therapist or talk to friends, and that can be incredibly healing to have conversations about these places that are so painful and usually so hidden. Having someone to kindly witness our shame. And then I would say first step after that, don't shame the shame. It's okay that this is happening. And remember that this sense of shame is hardwired, something that we've evolved to feel. It's normal. It's in place as a defense against acting in ways that might result in being disconnected from the group. It's a little bit of pain, or maybe not so little, but it's some pain to remind us of the life-threatening pain of being exiled. So some of us feel it more than others, depending on our age and our upbringing and our privilege. So in regards to age, interestingly, age 50 to 59 is supposed to be the sweet spot in terms of feeling less shame. And I just turned 60 in October, so we'll see what happens. But I thought it was really interesting that we feel it in our youth particularly, and then in our teen years a lot when we're getting all kinds of messages in our adolescence. And then sort of in our middle years, not so much, because we're sort of on top of the game, more or less. And then again, as we age, as we're really beginning to notice the effects of age and losing some of our abilities. So that first mindful step, can I be aware of shame when I feel it and not run from it? This is such a huge step, simply naming it. That third foundation of mindfulness, knowing our mental states. So shame is uncomfortable. Paying attention to it feels like the last thing we want to do. And yet that's key to working with shame or any of the difficult emotions. And I want to stay here just for a moment because the ability to be with what is uncomfortable is key to our practice. We can't just stay with joy and stillness and peace as much as we love those feelings and as beautiful as they are, because that just isn't the way that life unfolds. That isn't how it is to have a human mind and body and heart. And for some of us, any attention at all can feel shaming because we doubt our worth. So a number of years ago, and it actually wasn't all that many years ago, I was asked to serve as guiding teacher for my Dharma community in Palm Springs, Insight Community of the Desert. And I agreed, even though it was way beyond my comfort zone, because at the time I'd been barely teaching a year. And Larry Yang started this Sangha, and then he was the first guiding teacher, and then Beth Mulligan, who is a dear friend of mine, was the second guiding teacher. And so she marked the occasion of transferring, from her being guiding teacher to me, at a Sunday meeting at our Sangha, and there were a lot of people there. It was pre-COVID, and we used to get 60 or 70 people. And she designed a beautiful program with music and dancing and ceremony. And I cannot tell you the amount of shame I felt in that moment from the attention. Her gesture was beautiful. And as much as I love that dear friend, and as supportive of the community and me, that ceremony was intended to be, all I could focus on was me in that moment. And that internalized voice of shame that said, you are an imposter, you are unworthy. And if they don't know now, they will know soon enough. And I still struggle with this emotion, but it's only through recognizing the presence of shame that I can begin the healing process and naming it, that I can even take a step in that direction. Otherwise, it's just something that happens, and fear of it runs my life. So there's that question. Can I not shame the shame? Can I not shame myself for experiencing it, for having it? Can I recognize that this is part of being human too? And having made some room simply by naming it and not running away from it, can I possibly hold it and the experience of it in a new way? Because that is what the Dharma is about, recognizing, seeing clearly as we possibly can, and then changing our relationship based on that seeing. So if a friend came to you and told you their deepest places of shame and regret, what would be your response? I think I would hope that my response was welcoming, that it was appreciative of their courage, and also not rushing past what was uncomfortable to try to get somewhere else. I would want to listen fully, without judgment, without adding any further shame by dismissing the feeling or minimizing the experience or trying to talk them out of it. Working with shame is like working with all different difficult emotions, bringing that light of awareness to the experience of whatever it is without judgment, without rushing, with mindfulness, bearing witness, standing near, welcoming the expression of what the feeling is like, or if welcoming is too strong a word, being patient with the expression of the feeling. So a question that I came across, and I don't know where, but I think it's very powerful. Do we believe that not paying attention to suffering will diminish pain? Do we believe that not paying attention to suffering will diminish pain? Interesting to reflect on that. Many times I think I've acted as though I do believe that not paying attention to suffering will diminish pain. And appreciating the strength of vulnerability. To show another our places of shame is incredibly brave and incredibly vulnerable. To show those places to ourselves, maybe even braver. So Dr. Brené Brown, who has done so much groundbreaking research into connection, shame, and vulnerability, lots of books and TED Talks and seminars, she points out the strength in vulnerability, how we fear expressing it as weakness, yet when we see someone express vulnerability, we see the strength in it. I wonder, when I admit my shame, my difficult places, the places where I've really struggled, does it make me seem weaker? I don't feel weaker for having done it. So what happens when I share my vulnerable places with someone I trust? So working dharmically with shame, recognize the shame or whatever difficult emotion it is. Don't chase it away. Keep some space around it and allow it to open. Notice, how does it feel? What's the body response to it? And then what's the mental response to it? What's the condition of my heart around this? And that question, is it true? The feeling is true. Is the story true? And if it's not true, then how does my relationship to that story change? Or how might it change? So this is part of the core teachings of the Buddha. We recognize it, we see it, we understand it, and we see what else is possible in the space of understanding. And then as part of our wise effort, we cultivate wholesome mind states. So Rick Hansen points out that our inner critic, that inner voice of shame and unworthiness, is incredibly loud, and that our inner nurturer is often hard to hear. But we can encourage that voice. We can choose to bring the light of awareness to that voice, to amplify it, to practice it. The voice that knows our deep worth, that delights in the beautiful in us and in all beings. The voice of our divine self, if you want, or Buddha nature, or our original face, or whatever you want to call it. We can reclaim our innocence. We can reteach ourselves our loveliness, as the poet Galway Kinnell says. May I accept myself as I am in this moment. May I accompany this experience with kindness. May I feel my own care. May I be able to receive it. Bell Hooks wrote, "Love knows no shame. Love knows no shame." This is so much of what we do in our metta practices. Love without shame. Remind ourselves, train ourselves to give and receive love. Starting here. So let's just take a moment and then I'll open for questions or comments or your experiences that you might like to share. But just taking a minute to let the words settle. Okay, so I'll rely on George to let me know when it's time for announcements and dedication of merit. But before then, I would really love to open the floor and receive any comments or anything that you want to share with the group or anything that you just want to say and have witnessed. And Bob, I see you have your hand up, so you could start.
Thank you for a very thought-provoking discussion. My sense is, though, shame requires my cooperation. It requires my cooperation to accept the truth in the source or cause of whatever is creating this negativity. And if I don't believe it, I'm not going to feel shame.
Yeah.
So shame requires my help. And I think I generally refuse to give that help. So, but thank you for allowing me to think about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bob. And I think you're doing the practice. You're questioning it, I think, and deciding consciously what you're going to subscribe to and what you're not. And I think the problem for a lot of us is that we receive these messages and we don't even know that they aren't ours. And so that differentiating what's my voice and what's the voice of the culture and, what's delusion that I don't have to accept. It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Ian, I'd like to thank you for the topic today. It's one that I relate to a lot. And I wanted to emphasize one thing that you did mention, and that is, as a group of gay or queer people here, I think that shame is something that we have a particular relationship to, which is from a very early age, we have the experience of being different in our gender expression, perhaps in our behavior. We have the experience of falling outside the norms. And that is kind of so fundamental that I think we often carry it with us for our whole lives, whether we examine it or not. And people respond to it in different ways, and perhaps escape from it in different ways, or surmount it in different ways. But I think it's, as much as we cultivate a sense of pride about our identity, the shadow side of that is the shame that pride is meant to surmount.
Yeah.
And it remains.
Thank you. Who was speaking? I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
My name is Henry.
Henry, thank you so much. Yeah, I love that you brought in pride, because I think that is sort of the antidote, or the flip side of this. And that's something that we can develop. And I think that's another whole beautiful area to examine, like, how do we develop pride in the Buddha's path? And it occurred to me, while we were meditating, that in a way, like, you could almost look at shame is to guilt as arrogance is to pride. And so there's like there's a little subtle variation there, but pride feels very healthy and very healing. So I really thank you for naming that. Yeah. So I see John and then Christian.
Hi. Thanks so much, Ian. I feel like the living experience of what you were talking about was there for me. I really appreciate you talking about it. And I think that one of the effects of shame, in addition to invisibility, is to silence our true voice. And silence is such, on the one hand, it's a sacred practice that we practice in Buddhism and on the spiritual path. On the other hand, being silenced in relation to shame, there's an intentional kind of purpose to that we don't find our own voice, not just not being seen, but not being heard. And silence is such an oppressive weapon, I think, has been such an oppressive weapon for queer people. And even just your speaking about shame brings shame into the body, into the room, but also breaks that silence. And so I found that very healing and very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And I really appreciate you naming silence, as oppression and as an outflow of shame. That is really, really true. It's, and we silence. And then that's what's so insidious about shame, is that we do the work of the oppressors for them, by maintaining that silence out of a need for safety. Thank you so much for naming that, John. Christian, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this topic in particular to the group. It really resonates with me. I carry tons of shame with me. And I guess until today, I don't know that I realized that's what it was. I had a more general term for it. I think I just call it anxiety. But I think now I'm realizing it's shame. It's shame. And it stops me every day from being the real me. And I'm sort of, I can't think of anything else to say about it, but it's really a lot of food for thought, and I really appreciate you bringing it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, I really feel that too. It's really helpful to name what's going on in terms of that emotion and see it. I mean, I think I just didn't really know what it was either. It's just, I'm uncomfortable or anxious, or, It's just something I want to get away from, not to actually look at. And I see Chris. Yes.
Great. A centipede in your hoodie? I would have died after that. I couldn't stand it. Anyway, when I get into the depths of like a real deep meditation, when I'm really into a centered sort of samadhi, and then I feel that sort of, there's a thought that arises and I feel a cringing occurring and I start to protect my chest. There's a somatic sort of offering out your neck a little bit to a superior. I know I'm on something, and it's generally related to a little bit of a hindrance, especially related to shame. And, you start to investigate it when you're sitting and you start to look at, oh, there's that bully on the whatever, or there's the people that kept me from doing this, or I was afraid to express myself sexually, or felt guilty for touching myself, and then, or the shame of that is shame for who I am. It seems as though I can't quite figure it out when I'm sitting, but I know I'm touching into it and it's falling apart as I'm sort of touching it. It's that sort of not knowing, but you're sort of allowing it to fall apart in your psyche to sort of later compost it in a sense, to sort of plant a new flower in it, a new lotus and a new rebirth or whatever. But and through practice has been probably the most beneficial for me to see it. So anyway, thanks for your talk. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah. Beautiful description of the practice. And I think that's so much of what it is. It's the seeing it. And in the seeing, wisdom arises, and wisdom knows what to do. So thank you. Thanks for that. So anyone else?
Yeah, we're running out of time.
Okay.
Ian. Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk today.
So welcome.
Thank you. Do we have any announcements today? Jack?
Yes, I do. Last week we were supposed to process the GDF newsletter, quarterly newsletter, and I got the 48-hour flu, so I was out last week. It wasn't COVID, did it just? But we need to do that today, and so there's a nice bunch of guys here. If we can get 8 or 10 people together to help stamp and stuff envelopes and all that, we can do it in an hour or less. I'd appreciate people coming. And I'd like to see tens of people who can stay and come. Commitment. Thanks very much.
And do we have a host today?
Yes, we have a host. I'm your host. There is hot water and coffee cups and tea for those who would like to have some. There's some snacks out on the credenza. I don't know what that's called. I will be passing around the Donna hole for generosity. To your contributions, we are able to rent this space, put together this newsletter that we'll be sending out today that mostly goes to incarcerated people. And also, maybe someday, once again, we'll have our monthly dinner at Larkin Youth House. And I hear sometimes people meet at 12:30 outside the door to go to lunch together, but I think everybody will be just too busy folding up and stuffing on. But I think that about covers it all.
Thank you, Matthew. Anyone else? I just want to say thank you for everybody who sent healing thoughts to me this week. I had surgery on Tuesday. Clearly everything went well. I'm still here. So thank you so much for all of that. And I guess it's time to gather in a circle for our dedication of merit. Ian, would you like to do that, or shall we do our own?
I'd love it. I'd love to hear yours.
Okay. Thank you. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which was without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're having fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.